Ari Temkin, Big 12 Radio on TuneIn, joins us. And Ari, we're down to the final week. BYU, of course, is on the outside looking in based on the last rankings and probably stays that way tonight. Do they have to win to get in? And is Texas Tech is in, I think, no matter what happens. And that's the only way if BYU was to win for the Big 12 to get two teams in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think at this point there'd be any surprises for tonight's rankings. And it's a brand thing, clearly. And this is something we often complain about when it comes to the Big 12 and Big 12 teams. And probably a big reason why Kalani Sitake is at least entertaining Penn State. So there's just a lot here, Smokey. But yeah, 100%. It feels like BYU's only chance to get in is with a win. And in that case, I'd imagine both Big 12 teams get in. For some reason, the committee we know what that reason is, just doesn't view their wins and their resume as good as some of the others. And when you do a side-by-side comparison with BYU and Texas A&M or BYU Notre Dame, makes no sense. They are the lowest ranked Power 4 one-loss team ever heading into a conference championship game. So, it sort of is what it is, I guess, at this point in time. The committee finds which teams they want to rank and put in the playoff, and then they go backwards and then decide why each of those teams is in there. And this isn't, Chicken Little conspiracy theory stuff. Like, this is basic stuff. If you did a blind resume test with Notre Dame and BYU has a better resume. The only thing they're not better at is having long football history as Notre Dame does. Although BYU has won a national championship, it does have a Heisman Trophy winner. So, but clearly that's the reason why they're lower ranked than they are right now, and they probably should be.
Well, Ari, just in the last few minutes, it's been reported that Kalani Sitake is going to stay. So that changes a lot of things. They're $10 to $15 million in NIL, $9 to $9.5 million in salary. BYU, like they did with basketball, is pushing all the chips into the middle on football. And I know that that's not going to be a message to the committee this year, but it's certainly a message received by the BYU power brokers that, if you're going to really compete, you have to decide to be in it.
Yeah. And, what's interesting about this is, BYU feels like has been all in. But certainly some of the reports on what Kalani Sitake had been making, I think with it not being a public institution, some of these numbers are just reported, but it was like $3 million a year, which, at this day and age for a high level college football coach, that's pretty low. So, I think some of the flirtations with Penn State had to do with that, had to do with NIL, had to do with assistant coaches. It ultimately had to do with what you just talked about, Paul, which is, are you all in enough in order to get us to a spot where we don't have to lobby ourselves to get into the playoff? And look, maybe some of this is just perception and narrative, which, shouldn't be the case, but certainly seems to be the case. And, there's still a belief that when you look at the SEC, look at the Big Ten, that those are tested teams that have been through the gauntlet. And you look at the Big 12 and it's like, well, that's a cute league. They do some fun things. And, even though the league is now top heavy, as we're seeing with Texas Tech and BYU being the first teams with one or less losses to play in a Big 12 championship game since it was reintroduced, it's still, as top heavy as the league is, it takes a little bit of time, I guess, for the rest of the country and the perception to catch up to league. And it's probably just what it is at this point in time. So, yeah, I'm glad Sitake is staying. I never really thought he would leave, but it did seem like it was closer than ever to happening. And I think a big part of that was what we just talked about, was getting his money and the money for the assistants in NIL on track to make sure that they had the coffers in order to support it. Because, look at what Texas Tech's doing in recruiting. Signing day is tomorrow. And they've got a big-time class. It's a top 20 class right now for Texas Tech. If they don't lose any of their 5 stars, they've got 2 5 stars and 5 4 stars locked up. Like, that's what the conference needs to see with multiple teams moving forward. Because when you look, it's been a lot of Texas and Oklahoma at the top of the 247 and composite rankings when it comes to recruiting. And we haven't seen a lot of Big 12 schools. And obviously, it's going to take some success and money to break through in that way. And Tech has already done that. And so hopefully BYU can with Ryder Lyons as a 5-star in tow right now.
Ari, we also saw just before the Sitake news, Joey McGuire has signed an extension as well. 7 years, I believe, is what it's going to be for him. And we already know that they've got all their ducks in a row from a financial standpoint as well. So it seems like those two schools are kind of separating themselves in a way, both on the field and off the field. But How do you think this second go-around goes on Saturday in Arlington?
Yeah, is Joey McGuire repped by Jimmy Sexton?
I don't know, actually.
Feels like he probably is, and good for Joey. He's earned it. I just don't get at all why these coaches are locked up for such a ridiculous long period of time. Like I don't get it. And again, Joey's the best, and I love him, and good for him. But it's like, just it feels careless in a world in which there's 180 million of dead money being spent right now on coaches not to coach. But I digress. Look, I do think it'll go differently. I think it should be closer. I think, look, both of these teams are improved. They're certainly not the same teams they were when they first played, but, I'd argue that the steps that BYU has made offensively have shown dramatic improvement. I mean, we saw Chase Roberts, their best receiver, miss last week's game, and then Parker Kingston slid right in and played really well in that spot. So, like, they've got the playmakers. We know they've got the running game, and I think the quarterback is much better in position to play at a higher level in this game, because that's what they're going to need, obviously. With Texas Tech, it starts with what they do defensively. And I think, they don't play from behind. And, the obvious matchup here for BYU to exploit is BYU's defense against Texas Tech's offense. But, if I'm Jay Hill, the BYU defensive coordinator, or Aaron Roderick, the BYU offensive coordinator, I want to look deep into what Texas Tech's doing defensively, because, I know that the approach I took game plan wise going into the first game against Texas Tech did not work. And so, I almost want to go flip-flop and pass to set up the run a little bit, because obviously they've used the run to set up the pass all season, and that's not going to work against Tech. Like, Tech is going to stop you against the run on first and second down. So I just think they've got to flip-flop a little bit and get, Sheil Wood and what Texas Tech's doing on their toes a little bit, and try to make some hay against that great Texas Tech defense. Because again, I think both teams, their strengths are their defense. I still trust Texas Tech's offense a little bit more than BYU's, and what we've seen is Texas Tech is just this immovable object defensively. So I think that's where they got to attack.
Yeah, because the first game wasn't close. It took a while to kind of just completely separate, but that game never seemed like it was ever in doubt. And BYU is going to need, like you said, Texas Tech doesn't fall behind. They're going to need something happen early to kind of get all of that fog from the previous game out of their heads and get looking forward.
And Smoak, you look at the West Virginia game, and you're not going to take a ton away, except for the first few drives. West Virginia did a really good job in generating pressure on Barrett Morton. And first couple of drives, Texas Tech did not look good. And then they got the running game going, and they were off to the races, up 49, winning 49-0. So, the idea there that they were tied 0-0 early on in the game, or they're just used to playing from ahead. Their defense is the catalyst for everything that they do, and then they use that to run the football and bleed clock. And so, I think it starts with BYU's offensive attack, and you can't go into this game and think this is what we do and this is how we're going to do it, because that's what they did the first time these two teams played. And this Texas Tech's defense is so good and so dominant. You've got to do different things. You've got to, again, pass on first down. You just can't be obvious in your down and distance passing situations and play calling situations. So that's where I would attack. If I were BYU, I would try to build a little bit of a lead, try to get out in front. But look, easier said than done. Tech's a monster. I expect them to win this football game.
What was so impressive to me when they played the first time, Bear Bachmeier's strength right now, obviously, is his ability to run the ball. And when he gets out in space, he's going to get a couple extra yards because he's a behemoth. He's built like Dante Culpepper big. He's just so huge.
He's a load.
So Tech knew that, if we're going to stop him, we just have to make sure that he doesn't get past the line of scrimmage. So we're going to keep people close to the line of scrimmage and dare him to become a passer today. And we're not going to let him do these things where he just gets out and runs in space and runs over our guys. And that was what nobody else is either able to do or had planned to do with Bear Bachmeier. And it kind of shows how much further along their roster is than a lot of these teams, that they have the athletes that could do it and nobody else did.
No, that's a great point, Paul. In that game, just look at the box score. He had 11 carries for 12 yards, and the Texas Tech only had 1 sack. So it's not like sack adjusted yardage there, right? There was not lots of running there. And I would say overall, probably his worst game, in totality, but certainly running the ball. And that's why I say, like, they've got to flip-flop a little bit and not be so obvious in running. But, I mean, at some point, like, Bachmeier is going to have to make some throws from the pocket. And, like, if BYU is going to win this game, like, that's got to happen. And he is a true freshman quarterback. Like, the expectations have been so crazy high for him because he's played at such a high level, but, like, he shouldn't be able to sit in the pocket and pick Texas Tech apart in this game. But that, I think, is a big part of the approach for BYU. They've got to use the pass to open up the run, because in every other game they've used the run to open up the pass, and that's not going to work against Texas Tech. They already tried that. Other teams have tried that. Like, they just don't do that. They want to force you to be obvious, and then they're going to win up front. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the key is what you just said, Paul, is like, he's going to have to win in the pocket a little bit.
Let's see. Couple 9-win teams that I don't think we're exactly projecting to be 9-game winners there in Arizona and Houston. Which one came as more of a surprise to you this season?
Great question. Probably Arizona, only because Houston kind of got off to a really good start, and Arizona came, really big down the stretch of this season. And, like, I mean, not all 9 wins are created equal, but yeah, I would just say what Arizona was able to do, during the final stretch of the season, which is the toughest stretch. I mean, just ask Cincinnati. But I mean, Arizona, would they win 4 straight at the end of the year? 4 or 5 straight, 1, 2, 3, 5 straight. Colorado, Kansas, Cincinnati, Baylor, at Arizona State. Not a lot of tough games in there, but at Cincinnati and at Arizona State, those are big time wins, especially at that point when Cincinnati, and the calendar had just turned to November. So, the Iowa State loss was early when they were still healthy. So that's a tough one. When you play teams matters. They had a really good game against BYU that probably gets overlooked because, they lost, but it was a 33-27 game, and then they had a really close loss to Houston. So, they got off this slow start in conference play at just 2-3, and then rattled off 5 straight wins. And it's how they did it too, where, like, last year it was all on Noah Fafita and Tetairoa McMillan. This year, their running game really exploded. I think their defense was very opportunistic. They had just had, a really, really aggressive secondary that was really good at creating turnovers. So now I say all that, and then on the other side, like, Houston lost a ton. They lost their defensive coordinator. They lost, 2 of their best defensive players in Halsey, and yet they still come in and it's like McCutcheon becomes the Halsey. Like, so, this is a tough question to answer. I guess my answer is Arizona because they kind of came out of nowhere and won 5 straight. But what Houston's done is incredible because of all the pieces they lost from last year. And yet, despite that, they were still really good in the middle of their defense, still really good defensively without Shieldwood. It just goes to show you how good Willie Fritz is just as a defensive mind, because that's going to be commonplace. Like, they're going to lose a lot of these guys year over year. They don't have the NIL funds to keep them, especially when SEC and Big Ten schools come calling. And for them to be able to not really have the depth to replace those guys, but still do it is impressive.
All right, so Whittingham, you never know what he might do. He might say, okay, this is it. We don't know that. And he deserves it if he wants to ride off in the sunset. Then you have Gundy's been replaced by Eric Morris. Everything else, I think, is pretty much, it appears to be calm. Obviously, Baylor's been through the rough stretch and continue to do that. Do you feel like Leipold and Kleiman are both okay? Get to the offseason and try to regroup? You're a KU guy. What are your thoughts?
100%. I mean, look, Kleiman, it's been a rough couple of seasons here. And, the reality is 6-6 just doesn't cut it at K-State. I mean, they have a higher standard than that. But, I mean, he still won a Big 12 championship. He's had multiple 10-win seasons. I think he's got a longer leash at this point, Chris Kleiman does, than Lance Leipold. One of the questions we talked about on today's show was which of the 4 coaches, Satterfield, Aranda, Leipold, and Kleiman, are not back in 2027. So they're all going to be back for 26, but who will not be back in 27? And if the over-under is 2.5, I probably am at 2 right now. Like, I can tell you pretty obviously that I don't think Aranda is going to be back in 27. I don't think Satterfield is back in 27. I mean, they've been dreadful in November. It's remarkable. They've lost 9 of their last 10 games in the month of November. I mean, this was a team that had in complete control of winning a Big 12 championship or getting to a Big 12 championship and lost everything down the stretch of the season. It's remarkable how bad they were down the stretch of the season. And then there's Leipold and Kleiman. Look, I mean, Leipold, he's the guy that if this goes over 2.5 of those 4 coaches, he's the guy that does it. I just have more faith and confidence that Kleiman will get it figured out. But I think like there's a chance all 4 of them are gone by 2027 because Kleiman's team really fumbled at the end of last year. So if you look at like November of 2024, and then in addition to this season, it's not a great, 18 game stretch for Chris Kleiman and K-State. And it's just been a weird dynamic with Avery Johnson. But again, I just have more faith and confidence. I think Gene Taylor is a guy that, he and Chris Kleiman go back. Like there's a lot of continuity there. I think there's more pressure for Leipold to win now simply because he's had these 2 5-7 seasons back to back. They looked, even though much different, an awful lot like each other in some ways. And it feels like, KU fans certainly want to see the, new age, the non-Jalen Daniels Jayhawks, which is sad to say because for 6 years, this guy really helped to lift Kansas out of a beyond dreadful situation. I've talked about it all the time. Kansas was an FCS school playing in the Big 12 for a decade. The most competitive games that Kansas had in the middle part of the 2000s was against FCS opponents. They were an FCS level school playing in the Big 12 for a decade. So Leipold and Jalen Daniels are very much responsible for that. Daniels even predates Leipold, which is insane. But he really came unglued. Daniels did in the final game against Utah. And I think a lot of it just goes back to their defense. They were bad defensively last year under Brian Borland, and they fired him, move on to DK McDonald, and they weren't much better. There were some games where they played well, but on the whole, just not good enough defensively. And I think, if their defense doesn't improve next year, then they've got to have a new coach. They've got a brand new building that will be fully brand new in 2027. They've got to fill it up. They've got a fan base that's becoming more and more apathetic. And we know in Lawrence, it's all about basketball. So you need to figure out a way to make football more relevant for KU because otherwise this thing gets really south with a brand new stadium in 2027.
Ari, thank you, buddy. We'll talk next week because we'll know next week who's going to be in the playoff and whether it's Tech by themselves or somebody else along with them, which would be BYU if that happens. Thanks for your time and have a great week.
You too, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Ari Temkin in the mornings on Big 12 Radio.